day to you, everyone. Geniuses everywhere. This is the Kicking Ass Punkcast on Netrootsradio.com. Many thanks to David Waldman for a wonderful, fantastic handoff. On channel left is me, Fripp, and channel left in spirit is Steve. The Kicking Ass Punkcast is a show that is unlike any other show. It's not like any other talk show, and that is because it is upon the internet. The internet, you say? Yes, kicking ass means we afflict the comfortable and we comfort the afflicted liberally. We take no prisoners, we cede no quarter, we brook no hoo-ha, we assuage no dumb fuckery. Message us on the Twitter at Netroots Radio, one word, or Facebook at Netroots Radio. You can even listen to our signal or stream, whatever you want to call it, at netrootsradio.com. You can stream it at iTunes, TuneIn, and Stitcher, and our podcast will be available later today from our good friends at iTunes, Stitcher, and our new partner at Swell as well. Who knows? We might even be able to take calls today. Who knows? First up on our show, the blow of Hobby Lobby and how your boss will now have the power to not pay for your lady pills. We'll also detail the rank opportunism and hypocrisy. Then we'll dive into the text itself of the decision, a frothy mix of fantasy and Gore versus Bush one-time special dispensation and don't getting smart aleck ideas. This is about the lady pills and Hobby Lobby, so says Sammy Alito. And in our Get to Know Your Progressive Radio shows, it's Danielle and Shano from Talking Left, a truly, truly great show that can be heard on We Act Radio in DC, SoFlo Radio, and of course, right here, Netroots Radio live Sunday mornings, 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific. But now, to our first story up front. Yesterday, the Supreme Court ruled that closely held corporations can refuse to offer contraceptive coverage to their workers based upon religious grounds, siding with two businesses who say they're morally opposed to certain types of birth control. The highly anticipated case has been dominating national headlines for months, but now that the decision is here, how do you think it affects you? This is from Tara Kulp-Wrestler and Igor Volsky at Think Progress. Now, if you're one of the estimated 14,000 sad individuals, or other individuals who happen to work at Hobby Lobby or Conestoga Wood, the companies who represented the two plaintiffs in this case, then you're most immediately affected by Monday's decision. Your employers no longer have to cover several types of birth control that they're opposed to. Both companies object to covering emergency contraception, which they falsely claim is a type of abortion, but despite all the scientific evidence to the contrary. Hobby Lobby's owners also take issue with two forms of intrauterine devices, long-lasting forms of birth control, and for the same unscientific reasons. So, the workers employed by those businesses won't be able to use their insurance coverage for those types of birth control anymore. They'll presumably be able to continue using their health plans for other methods like hormonal birth controls, pills that their bosses don't have a problem with. But even if you don't happen to work at Hobby Lobby or Conestoga Wood, Interesting name for a company this morning. However, there's a chance that your birth control coverage may also be put into question. More than 70 other companies also sued for the right to stop following Obamacare's contraceptive provision. According to the National Women's Law Center, 48 of those cases are still pending. Now that the court has sided with Hobby Lobby, it will be much easier for some of those companies to win their suits and opt out of covering certain types of contraception. Well then, Monday's ruling also leaves the door open for other companies to stop covering certain types of birth control in the future, even if they are one of the businesses that already filed a suit against the government. Now, although the court's decision doesn't apply to publicly traded companies, and the justices didn't wade into the question of whether those types of companies can claim religious beliefs, that doesn't mean that it's targeted at a narrow slice of employers in this country. Closely held corporations, which are defined as companies with limited numbers of shareholders, comprise more than 90% of the organizations in the United States and are responsible for about 52% of all private employment. Let that sink in for a second. For instance, Koch Industries and Walmart are both closely held because they're controlled by families. Fortunately, women who want affordable contraception aren't entirely out of luck. The vast majority of women with private insurance are already working at companies that comply with Obamacare's birth control mandate. And even the people working at closely held corporations owned by people who oppose birth control may have options. The Obama administration is going to likely ensure that they have another avenue to get the coverage that they need. Now, as Justice Anthony Kennedy noted in his concurrence, the federal government has already established an existing, recognized, workable, and already implemented framework to provide coverage for contraceptive services. Now, Kennedy is, of course, referring to the Obama administration's existing exemption for religiously affiliated nonprofits like Catholic colleges or Catholic charities that refuse to provide birth control to their employees. Now, in those cases, the administration permits the employer to refuse coverage but requires insurance companies to cover without cost-sharing contraception coverage for female employees who wish it. Now, adding new regulations that closely held corporations along with the nonprofits would be the easiest fix. Now, what Alina Selenikoff, the Vice President and Director of Women's Health Policy at the Kaiser Family Foundation, told Think Progress, there are still employers, however, who are suing that this accommodation for nonprofits is not adequate. So, Washington and Lee University law professor Timothy Just also added that the court's ruling invites the government to extend the alternative that they already extended to religious organizations to closely held for profits, and they could do this through an interim final regulation on very short notice, possibly even through guidance. Interesting. Now, there is at least one bright spot for Hobby Lobby opponents who are concerned about a slippery slope in which employers could deny access to any other kind of coverage that they oppose. Monday's decision sets a problematic precedent for future religious liberty claims. These specious religious liberty claims, but the justices did specify that the ruling can't be immediately extrapolated to apply to other types of health services. For instance, closely held companies cannot refuse coverage for blood transfusion or vaccination based upon religious belief. This decision concerns only the contraceptive mandate and should not be understood to hold that all insurance coverage mandates, for example for vaccinations or blood transfusions, must necessarily fall if they conflict with an employer's religious beliefs. Nor does it provide a shield for employers who might cloak illegal discrimination as a religious practice. So the opinion states. They say, other stuff isn't going to happen. You can bet on it. Trust us. Although the reproductive rights community is reeling from the implications of the Hobby Lobby decision, the legal fights will not be over. There's going to be some speculation that the Hobby Lobby employees could be also able to file a Civil Rights Act Title VII complaint on the grounds that the company is treating female employees differently than male employees by refusing to cover gender-specific health services. I'm Fripp, and we are kicking ass. There's a personal note to this. My very first job in advertising was in a very small ad agency in a very small town, run by a very small man with a very large ego and not much of a personality. The only thing bigger than this person's ego was his stunning hypocrisy. And that's what reminds me of this overall religious exemption case from SCOTUS. And let's just say that this advertising agency president loved him some Christian dominionist ideology, some Christian wealth prosperity, Ronald Reagan, conservative snake politics, and barking at everybody within earshot to live as he commanded, and while he just followed none of it. It wasn't that very small man was bad at his job. He was actually spectacularly, epically terrible at it. He was hopelessly untalented, and being an ideological judge of people, he was also an ideological judge of advertising creative, which created a massive vacuum of soul-destroying suck work. He lived lavishly in a house on a hill with his wife and his child because he never paid his taxes or his vendors or any of his bills. Such a typical 80s thing. Well, such a typical any time, really. Fate caught up to our very small man. And there happens to be a call in the office. Could that be him? Let's certainly hope not. But back to the story. As I said, he lived in a hill with his wife and child because he never paid his taxes, as I had said, or any of his bills, and fate caught up to him and shut his agency down with prejudice. But that was not the most offensive part. And due to his strongly held Christian convictions, he demanded that every employee sign an employment agreement to which you would live by his rules, his laughable ethical expectations, and you could be fired for committing crimes of moral turpitude that only he would define, and he would prosecute, and he did. Innocents suffered. Employees suffered. So when the remaining young, bright employees left quickly, and the clients stopped returning phone calls and stopped sending checks, there was a knock on the door. And karma had arrived, and with brutal efficiency, destroyed him, his business, his family, his crimes of moral turpitude, and he and his entire smug Christian superiority. And it was just, and it was a leveling that was awesome to witness. And this hypocritical Hobby Lobby exemption carve-out with Hobby Lobby in the driver's seat reminds me of that very small man. And although we see them victorious in their little Supreme Court carve-out today, I got angry. And I could get really angry about this. And I am, to a point. But there's another point to this. The fact is that as a result of this, I also see the potential of millions of men. But more so, I see millions of women and the men who love them rising in anger. An anger that can change things, that compels people to pick up a pen, a phone, and registering to vote and getting their friends to vote. You are not powerless. You matter. Your vote matters. Your vote is your voice, and it's time to raise it. Now, time and politics click just right to shine a light through the God hole in the clouds, to eliminate that, shall we say, illuminate instead the smug religious superiority of Hobby Lobby. This is from Alexander Kaufman in the Huffington Post. Hobby Lobby, now free to drop emergency morning after pills and intrauterine devices from its workers' health insurance plans, has given no indication that it plans to stop helping its male employees obtain erectile dysfunction treatments. Now, the Supreme Court Monday ruled that the craft store chain owned by evangelical Christians doesn't have to pay for health care coverage of its contraceptions and its contraceptives provided or prohibited by its owner's religion, but pills and pumps that help a man stiffen his mighty member in preparation for sex are perfectly acceptable.
Danger Powers personal effects.
Actually, my name is Austin Powers.
One Swedish-made penis enlarger pump.
That's not mine.
One credit card receipt for Swedish-made penis enlarger, signed by Austin Powers.
I'm telling you, baby, that's not mine.
One warranty card for Swedish-made penis enlarger pump, filled out by Austin Powers.
I don't even know what this is. This sort of thing ain't my bag, baby.
One book, Swedish-made penis enlarger pumps and me. This sort of thing is my bag, baby, by Austin Powers.
Let's go to the Twitters, shall we? Hobby Lobby covers men's Viagra just on the slim chance that you are wondering exactly how effed up today is. From Andy Zeisler. Retweet if you believe that the male justices could have ruled differently if Hobby Lobby case was about Viagra or Cialis. From Representative Mark Ticano. Thank goodness that Hobby Lobby's God covers vasectomies and Viagra. From Lauren Dane. And can someone tell me which part of the Bible says vasectomies and Viagra are okay with the big guy? Hobby Lobby. From Victoria Aviard. Now, a provision in the Affordable Care Act requires corporations to offer insurance plans that meet minimum coverage standards if those corporations take advantage of tax benefits for competing employees with for compensating employees in health insurance rather than wages. But the owners of Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Wood Specialty Store, a Pennsylvania wood manufacturer, challenged this provision, arguing that it violated their religious freedom. Evangelical Christians have long argued that life begins at conception, and therefore medical procedures that disrupt the first stages of pregnancy amount to murder. In the case of Hobby Lobby, this extends to a woman taking pills such as Plan B, Next Choice, or Ella, any of which could prevent her ovaries from releasing an egg, and that would be fertilized after unprotected sex. Perhaps taking a note from the Catholic Church's opposition to sterilization. Hobby Lobby also objected to long-term birth control methods such as IUDs, which can cost women up to $1,000. But that does not explain why Hobby Lobby doesn't object to covering the cost of its male employees' vasectomies. Yes, from Molly Redden in Mother Jones. Documents filed with the Department of Labor and dated December 2012, 3 months after the company's owners filed their lawsuit, showed that Hobby Lobby and their 401k employment retirement plan held more than $73 million in mutual funds with investments in companies that produce emergency contraceptive pills, intrauterine devices, and drugs commonly used in abortions. Hobby Lobby makes large matching contributions to this company-sponsored 401k. Several of the mutual funds in Hobby Lobby's retirement plan have stock holdings in companies that manufacture the specific drugs and devices that the Green family that owns Hobby Lobby is fighting to keep out of Hobby Lobby's healthcare policies. The emergency contraceptive pills, Plan B and Ella, and copper and hormonal intrauterine devices. These companies include Teva Pharmaceutical Industries, which makes Plan B and Paragard, a copper IUD, and Activus, which makes a generic version of Plan B and distributes Ella. Other stock holdings in the mutual funds selected by Hobby Lobby include Pfizer, the maker of Cytotec, and Prostin E2, which are used to induce abortions. Bayer, which manufactures the hormonal IUDs Skyla, Mirena, AstraZeneca, which has an Indian subsidiary that manufactures Prostodin, Servaprime, and Partisan, 3 drugs commonly used in abortions, and Forest Laboratories, which makes Cervidil, a drug used to induce abortions. Several funds in the Hobby Lobby retirement plan also invested in Aetna and Humana, 2 health insurance companies that cover surgical abortions, abortion drugs, and emergency contraception in many of the healthcare policies that they sell. But it gets better. From Brian Woodward in the Red Dirt Report. One huge problem with this situation is that up until 2012, Hobby Lobby provided them this birth control as part of their insurance plan. Only when they realized that Obamacare was going to mandate these coverage did they suddenly become interested in not providing these drugs. In their initial complaint to the United States District Court for the Western District of Oklahoma, Hobby Lobby stated, quote, after learning about the current HHS mandate controversy, Hobby Lobby discovered that the formulary for its prescription drug policy included 2 drugs, Plan B and Ella, that could cause an abortion. This is a huge indictment upon the Green family and Hobby Lobby. How can they be expected to be taken seriously when the precise drugs that they want relief from providing, they provided in the past? What does it say about their commitment to the unborn that they had no clue that they had been for years providing the drugs which they assert can cause abortions? Of course, as most people know, the nonsense goes further. The overwhelming majority of the mainstream doctors and medical associations scoff at the pseudoscientific claims that these drugs cause abortions. Even the official journal of the Catholic Health Association, Health Progress, came to the conclusion that Plan B does not cause abortions. So here is the situation that has not been fully described by most of the media. Not only did Hobby Lobby provide the drugs that they now oppose until they learned of the Obamacare mandate, but the claims in which they make about the drugs being abortifacients have no basis in reality. So, what is the real nature of this case brought forth by Hobby Lobby? Is it a political maneuver made out of complete disdain for the current Obama administration? Is it the ego of a billionaire who wants to shine his light in the spotlight of the Supreme Court? The claim is that it is difficult to believe that this is a deeply held religious belief. It is so deeply held that they have been providing these very same abortifacients unknowingly for years. There are two large issues that has to get past even to open up to believing that this is a claim. First is that they were opposed to these drugs all along, but never thought to look into whether their insurance policy provided them. Second is that within this Christian corporation that gets stuff brought in from China, so dedicated to pro-life ideals that no one ever mentioned to them or made any of the Greens aware that these drugs were included under their healthcare plan. Now, if they are so religious and against these drugs, one would think that at some point that they would have checked it, but they have, as they assert, not known, as it was part of their policy. Well, that's fairly feasible. However, if that is true, that negates the sincerity of their belief. The Greens did not suddenly become enlightened to the claim that Plan B and Ella might be causing abortions. Plan B has been available for 15 years, approved by the FDA in 1999. Ella, on the other hand, was approved in 2010. They knew, and likely against medical consensus, believed that these drugs could cause abortion. Then they claim that collectively, as owners of their Christian enterprise, they vehemently oppose these drugs. All the while, they never thought to look into their insurance coverage and evaluate whether or not their policies cover these drugs. Only when a president, whom the Greens diametrically oppose, signed into law the Affordable Care Act, did they suddenly object. It was likely due to multiple factors. Some mentioned before that Hobby Lobby brought forth into the suit. One thing that is clear, and is not to do one thing too, is to deeply held religious convictions. Now, of course, thanks to Adam B. at Daily Kos, we'll go through the decision next. I am Fripp. We are kicking ass. Now from Adam B. at the Great Orange Satan. In Hobby Lobby, the Supremes grant religious objection rights to nonprofit. What a day I'm having. To for-profit corporations. Let's start off like this. In a widely awaited but still 85% as sucky as you feared 5-4 decision yesterday morning, the Supreme Court of the United States has held that for-profit corporations are persons for purpose of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and their religious rights were unduly burdened by the contraceptive mandate provisions of the Affordable Care Act. Now, because of the contraceptive mandate was not the least restrictive means available for the government to provide such coverage, now, in the court's mind, the government could just assume that the cost itself and already provided an opt-out for religious nonprofit employers. The mandate on private employers violates the law. Now, the court was careful to limit its opinion in theory to these facts. It applies only to closely held corporations and not publicly traded ones. It applies to the contraceptive mandate and not religious objections to all laws in general, believing that the compelling interest struck a sensible balance between religious liberty and competing prior governmental interests, but we'll see about that. Let's wade into the minefield with a warning from Justice Ginsburg, who wrote for the 4 dissenting justices refers to this decision. In a decision of startling breadth, the court holds that commercial enterprises, including corporations along with partnerships and sole proprietorships, can opt out of any law, saving tax laws, they judge incompatible with their sincerely held religious beliefs. Now, compelling governmental interests in uniform compliance with the law and disadvantages that religion-based opt-outs impose on others hold no sway, the court decides, at least when there is a less restrictive alternative. And such an alternative, the court suggests, there will always be whenever, in lieu of tolling an enterprise claiming a religion-based exemption, the government, for example, the general public, can pick up the tab. The court forgets that religious organizations exist to serve a community of believers. For-profit corporations do not fit that bill. Moreover, history is not on the court's side. Recognition of the discrete characters of ecclesiastical and lay corporations date back to Blackstone, all the way back to the laws of England. To reiterate, for-profit corporations are different from religious nonprofits in that they use labor to make a profit rather than to perpetuate the religious values shared by a community of believers. Now, let's be clear, explains Justice Alito for the five that you'd expect. Corporations are people too, for purposes of this here statute. Here we go. As we will show, Congress provided protection for people like the Hans and Greens by employing a familiar legal fiction. It included corporations within the RFRA's definition of persons. But it is important to keep in mind that the purpose of this fiction is to provide protection for human beings. A corporation is simply a form of an organization used by human beings to achieve desired ends. An established body of law specifies the rights and obligations of the people, including shareholders, officers, and employees who are associated with a corporation in one way or another. When rights, whether constitutional or statutory, are extended to corporations, the purpose is to protect the rights of these people. For example, extending Fourth Amendment protection to corporations protects the privacy interests of employees and others associated with the company. Protecting corporations from government seizure of their property without just compensation protects all those who have a stake in the corporation's financial well-being. And protecting the free exercise right of corporations like Hobby Lobby, Conestoga, and Mardell protects the religious liberty of the humans who own and control these companies. Just try to swallow that. Indeed, as the opinion claims, you can go back over 50 years and find the court not questioning that a for-profit corporation had religious rights. And then in 1961, a kosher supermarket seeking the right to be open on Sundays despite Massachusetts blue laws, to which the dissent counters the suggestion is barely there. True, one of the five challengers to the Sunday closing law was a corporation owned by 4 Orthodox Jews. The other challengers were human individuals, not artificial law-created entities, so there was no need to determine whether the corporation could institute the litigation. Now, the court insists this isn't something publicly traded companies are going to get involved in, and even if they did, well, we could use corporate law principles to suss out whatever their religious beliefs are. Let's continue as we unpack this. The HHS contends that Congress could not have wanted RFRA to apply for for-profit corporations because it is difficult as a practical matter to ascertain the sincere beliefs of a corporation. HHS goes so far as to raise the specter of divisive, polarizing proxy battles over the religious identity of large, publicly traded corporations such as IBM or General Electric. These cases, however, do not involve publicly traded corporations, and it seems unlikely that this sort of corporate giants, the corporate giants to which HHS refers, will often assert RFRA claims. HHS has not pointed to any example of a publicly traded corporation asserting RFRA rights, and numerous practical restraints would likely prevent that from occurring. For example, the idea that unrelated shareholders, including institutional investors with their own set of stakeholders, would agree to run a corporation under the same religious beliefs seems improbable. So you say. In any event, we have no occasion in these cases to consider RFRA's application to such companies. The companies in these cases before us are closely held corporations. Oh, the magic. Oh, smell the magic. Yes. Oh, each owned and controlled by members of a single family, and no one has disputed the sincerity of their religious beliefs. HHS has also provided no evidence that the purported problem of determining the sincerity of an asserted religious belief has moved Congress to exclude for-profit corporations from RFRA's protection. HHS and the principal dissent express concern about the possibility of disputes among the owners of corporations, but that is not a problem that arises because of RFRA, or that is unique to this context. The owners of closely held corporations may, and sometimes do, disagree about the conduct of business. And even if RFRA did not exist, the owners of a company might well have a dispute relating to religion. For example, some might want a company's stores to remain open on the Sabbath in order to make more money, and others might want the stores to close for religious reasons. State corporate law provides a ready mean for resolving any conflict, for example, by dictating how a corporation can establish its governing structure. Courts will, of course, turn to that structure and the underlying state law in resolving disputes. Oh, well, good for that. So, what about the contraceptive mandate? Interesting, the court concedes it for the sake of an argument that it serves a compelling state interest, but still, that's not enough. Let's go into it. By requiring the Hans and the Greens and the companies to arrange for such coverage, the HHS mandate demands that they engage in conduct seriously that violates their religious beliefs. If the Hans and Greens and the companies do not yield to this demand, the economic consequences, the comeuppance, will be severe. The companies continue to offer group health plans that do not cover the contraceptives at issue. They will be taxed $100 per day, and for each individual. For Hobby Lobby, the bill could amount to $1.3 million per day, or about $475 million per year. For Conestoga, the assessment could be about $90,000 per day, or $33 million per year. Oh, terrible. Yes, these sums are surely substantial. Are their religious beliefs loony? The court's not going to look into that. Their sincerity is what counts, and that is what creates the burden. The Hans and Greens believe that providing the coverage demanded by HHS regulations is connected to the destruction of an embryo in ways that's sufficient, and very sufficient, to make it immoral for them to provide this coverage. This belief implicates a difficult and important question of religion and moral philosophy, that namely the circumstances under which it is wrong for a person to perform an act that is innocent in itself but has the effect of enabling or facilitating the commission of an immoral act by another. Arrogating the authority to provide a binding national answer to this religious and philosophical question, HHS and the principal dissent, in effect, tell the plaintiffs that their beliefs are flawed. For good reason, we have repeatedly refused to take such a step. Oh my God. So as RFRA applies, there's a burden, and the contraceptive mandate fails the test. Here's how they get there. The least restrictive mean standard is exceptionally demanding, and it is not satisfied here. HHS has not shown that it lacks other means of achieving the desired goal without imposing a substantial burden on the exercise of religion by the objecting parties in these cases. See the statute requiring the government to demonstrate that the application of a substantial burden to that person is the least restrictive means of furthering a compelling governmental interest. Well, okay. The most straightforward way of doing this would be for the government to assume the cost of providing the 4 contraceptives at issue to any women who are unable to obtain them under their health insurance policies due to their employer's religious objections. This would certainly be less restrictive of the plaintiff's religious liberty, and HHS has not shown that this is not a viable alternative. Oh, Sammy, thank you for the gimme. HHS has not provided any estimate of the average cost per employee of providing access to these contraceptives, 2 of which, according to the FDA, are designed primarily for emergency use, nor has HHS provided the statistics regarding the numbers of employees who might be affected because they work for corporations like Hobby Lobby, Conestoga, and Martell. Nor has HHS told us that it is unable to provide such statistics. It seems likely, however, that the cost of providing the forms of contraceptives at issue in these cases, if not all FDA-approved contraceptives, would be minor when compared with the overall cost of the ACA. Now, according to one of the Congressional Budget Office's most recent forecasts, the ACA's insurance coverage provisions will cost the federal government more than $1.3 trillion through the next decade if, as HHS tells us, providing all women with cost-free access to all FDA-approved methods of contraception is a government interest of the highest order. It is hard to understand HHS's argument that it cannot be required under RFRA to pay anything in order to achieve this important goal. HHS contends that RFRA does not permit us to take this option into account because RFRA can't be used to require creation of entirely new programs. But we see nothing in the RFRA that supports this argument, and drawing the line between creation of an entirely new program and the modification of an existing program, which RFRA surely allows, would be fraught with problems. And don't worry, Justice Alito exists. This is a really narrow holding and doesn't create religious exemptions to good laws. Here we go. HHS and the principal dissent argue that a ruling in favor of the objecting parties with these cases would lead to a flood of religious objections regarding a wide variety of medical procedures and drugs, such as vaccinations and blood transfusions, but HHS has made no effort to substantiate this prediction. HHS points to no evidence that insurance plans in existence prior to the enactment of the ACA excluded coverage for such items, nor has HHS provided evidence that any significant number of employers sought exemption on religious grounds from any of ACA's coverage requirements other than the contraceptive mandate. Our decision in these cases is concerned solely with the contraceptive mandate. Our decision should not be understood to hold that an insurance coverage mandate must necessarily fail or fall if it conflicts with an employer's religious beliefs. Other coverage requirements, such as immunizations, may be supported by different interests. For example, the need to combat the spread of infectious diseases, and may involve different arguments about the least restrictive means of providing them. The principal dissent raises the possibility that discrimination in hiring, for example, on the basis of race, might be cloaked as religious practice to escape legal sanction. Our decision today provides no such shield. The government has a compelling interest in providing an equal opportunity to participate in the workforce without regard to race, and prohibitions on racial discrimination are precisely tailored to achieve that critical goal. I am Fripp, and we are kicking ass. Let's get back to the principal dissent by Justice Ginsburg. All right, let's check this out. She reminds us of the importance of sexual autonomy and the economic stakes for women in litigation. Quote, the ability of women to participate equally in the economic and social life of the network has been, excuse me, I said network, didn't I? I meant nation, has been facilitated by their ability to control their reproductive lives. All right, that's Planned Parenthood of Southern Pennsylvania versus Casey, 1992. Congress acted on that understanding when, as part of a nationwide insurance program intended to be comprehensive, it called for coverage of preventative care responsive to women's needs. The ACA had a large gap, however. It left out preventative services that many women's health advocates and medical professionals believe are critically important. To correct this oversight, Senator Barbara Mikulski introduced the Women's Health Amendment, which added to the ACA's minimum coverage requirements a new category of preventative services specific to women's health. Women paid significantly more than men for preventative care, the amendment's proponents noted. In fact, cost barriers operated to block many women from obtaining needed care at all. And the dissenters deride us as unfounded, the court's new recognition of religious rights for for-profit corporations. Let that sink in. Until this litigation, no decision of this court recognized a for-profit corporation's qualification for a religious exemption from a generally applicable law, whether under the Free Exercise Clause or the RFRA. The absence of such precedent is what one would expect, for the exercise of religion is characteristic of natural persons, not artificial legal entities. As Chief Justice Marshall observed nearly 2 centuries ago, a corporation is an artificial being, invisible, intangible, and existing only in contemplation of law. The First Amendment's free exercise protection, the court has indeed recognized shelter churches and other nonprofit religion-based organizations. So for many individuals, religious activity derives meaning in large measure from participation in a larger religious community. And furtherance of that autonomy of religious organization often furthers individual religious freedom as well. Now, the court's special solicitude to the rights of a religious organization, however, is just that. No such solicitude is traditional for commercial organizations. Indeed, until today, religious exemptions had never been extended to any entity operating in the commercial profit-making world. The reason why is hardly obscure. Religious organizations exist to foster the interests of persons subscribing to the same religious faith. Not so of for-profit corporations. Workers who sustain the operations of those corporations commonly are not drawn from one religious community. Indeed, by law, no religion-based criterion can restrict the workforce of for-profit corporations. The distinction between a community made up of believers in the same religion and one embracing persons of diverse beliefs, clear as it is, constantly escapes the court's attention. Or is it something they deliberately want to have escape their attention? One can only wonder why the court shuts this key difference from sight. Back to Adam B. But even if these for-profit corporations can maintain religious beliefs, this doesn't really burden them. Undertaking the inquiry that the court forgoes, I would conclude that the connection between the family's religious objection and the contraceptive coverage requirement is too attenuated to rank as substantial. The requirement carries no command that Hobby Lobby or Conestoga purchase or provide these contraceptives that they which find objectionable. Instead, it calls on the companies covered by the requirements to direct money into undifferentiated funds that finance a wide variety of benefits under comprehensive health plans. Those plans, in order to comply with the ACA, must offer contraceptive coverage without cost sharing, just as they must cover an array of other preventative services. Importantly, the decisions whether to claim benefits under the plans are made not by Hobby Lobby or Conestoga, but by the covered employees and dependents in consultation with their healthcare providers. Should an employee of Hobby Lobby or Conestoga share the religious beliefs of the Greens and the Hans, they are, of course, under no compulsion to use the contraceptives in question, but no individual decision by an employee and their physician to use contraception, treat an infection, have a hip replaced in any meaningful sense. Their employer's decision or action, it is doubtful that Congress, when it specified that burdens must be substantial, had in mind a linkage, thus interrupted by independent decision makers, the woman and her health counselor standing between the challenged government action and the religious exercise claimed to be infringed. Any decision to use contraceptives made by a woman covered under Hobby Lobby's or Conestoga's plan not to be propelled by the government will be the woman's autonomous choice informed by the physician she consults. And as it stands, remember this, after what has happened yesterday, many people are feeling very angry about this. You are not powerless. For those who hear this, you matter. Your vote matters. Your vote, your voice. Register to vote. Get your friends registered and vote. It's so, so important. I am Fripp, and we are kicking ass. As I promised, I have an interview with the brilliant and the charming Danielle and Shano of Talking Left, who spoke with me in our continuing segments, Get to Know Your Progressive Radio. What I would really like to know is, tell us about your show. Tell us about Talking Left and how it got there.
Absolutely. Talking Left, first of all, it's speaking to you a little while ago about how everybody's on Skype and in different locations is exactly how we started. Shane was in New York. I was in South Florida.
Wow.
And we connected via an online radio program.
The Stephanie Miller Show.
The Stephanie Miller Show. Yes.
Oh, wow.
And we became internet friends, email friends, eventually phone friends. And then one day Shane said, has anybody ever put a microphone in front of you?
Yeah, because Danielle, she has a great voice. Come on.
Fantastic.
She really does have a very warm voice. You hear a lot of people on the radio. Mark Levine, not a voice for radio. Danielle has a voice for radio.
Neither a face nor a voice with Mark Levine.
Mark Levine.
Well said. But at the time, we were doing two different shows. I was doing a show called Left in Dixie. Shane was doing a show called Funked in the Head.
That's with an N. Funked.
Yes. And Shane moved to Florida. We both eventually moved to D.C. And somewhere in the process, we just decided that it was silly to do two shows.
Right.
And we made Talking Left.
What was your means of distribution, getting it out there?
Well, it's changed over time. As technology has become more affordable, especially, and we've learned from so many different people along the way. I mean, at first, we were just recording it and throwing an MP3 onto a website and saying, "Here's the link." You could write, if you want to hear our show, hit the play button or right click. I mean, that was the first iteration of like Funked in the Head and Left in Dixie. Then as we got, Danielle was friends with Nicole Sandler. Nicole's like, "Come on over to my channel, Radio or Not." So she allowed us to, broadcast not only the audio, but she also let us use the Ustream. So we were using Ustream for a while. And then Ustream went a little nuts. It started a lot of ads, made it very expensive, started limiting space. And we said, the heck with that. Around that time, YouTube started coming in. So we started using YouTube. But in terms of delivering this show, what I learned from working my day job is that internet streaming is a really great way to distribute, because you can upload, CD quality using a relatively inexpensive piece of software, so long as you have like a hosting service, just like you have a hosting service for your website. So that's how we do our show. We have we have a hosting service. We use SAM audio broadcasting software, and we just hit record, start streaming, and we start talking through our studio, and it goes straight to that. Every station, whether they be a terrestrial station or an internet station, I give them the URL, and they can put it up on their site, and it works fantastically.
So you actually have a day job now. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We work for the Tom Hartman program. Both of us. I moved up here a little over 2 years ago, and Danielle did as well. And as they got to know Danielle, they brought Danielle on board, so we were both associate producers over there. So that's where I learned a lot. Both Danielle and I. We do our absolute best to kind of keep the two shows separate, because we can't be as smart as Tom. So if anyone tuned in and expecting something like Tom, they would be sorely disappointed.
Yes.
So that's, we don't keep it a secret, yet at the same time, we don't do our show as associate producers of the Tom Hartman program, especially if we say something really stupid.
Yes. Don't blame Tom.
Don't blame Tom.
It's probably something he didn't teach us.
Yes, we just weren't listening that day.
Yes.
So.
What was for you as what triggered your political interest? And I could Danielle, you could go first.
Well, my parents were always very much very staunch progressives, liberal, borderline, socialists type, always sitting down, reading the paper, talking about what was going on as I was growing up, pointing out stories, explaining to me, how tax policy worked and why things like regressive tax policies really hurt everyday people. And we were lower middle class, working poor, really, but we owned a lot of businesses, and I saw them put those practices that they believed in into play and fought to treat workers well and give them health insurance and pay them decent wages, even at times when they couldn't take a paycheck themselves. And it really instilled those values in me. And, then somebody one day said, in fact, my father actually said, there's this really cool new show, you have to listen to it. And it was the Stephanie Miller Show. And that was pretty much the start of, wow. Oh my God, I need to leave this station on 24 hours a day and just hear what's going on.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, for mine, my story is exactly the same as Danielle's, except it's the complete opposite. My parents also got me very involved in politics at a very young age because my parents were butt wrong about everything. Because I was born in 1970, and I was arguing with my parents in 79 about Reagan because I thought Reagan was a complete, problem, we'll say. And my parents were firm believers that Cadillac moms existed, that, they were with all due respect, my dad has passed, and to my mom, George Bush turned her into a progressive, so, they aren't that way anymore. But back then, quite racial. And I was, at the same time that they were telling me these things, I was going to public schools. And all my friends, because I was part of integration, forced integration at that, I'm like, I see my friends' moms. I see their dads. I see them working 3 jobs. I see them working their butts off. There's no such thing, mom and dad. So what informed me and started me into politics is hearing something that wasn't lining up with what I was seeing personally. And I would argue with them about this and then learn how to debate. And then it just grew from there. In terms of radio, Stephanie Miller is exactly the same way. My brother called me one day. He said, you have to listen to Stephanie Miller. So I tune into our local station in Rochester, New York, to the progressive station. I'm like, I listened to it for a little while. I called him back. I said, hey, I like what she has to say, but she's a little abrasive, entertaining, smart, but abrasive. He goes, no, not Randy Rhoads, Stephanie Miller. And I also love Randy Rhoads now.
Absolutely.
But as your first entree, Stephanie is a great way because she's the poundful of sugar that helps the medicine go down. You are laughing your butt off and you don't realize how much you're learning the entire time. All the arguments she's teaching you, all the weapons that you can use for those political debates. But you also have a laugh in there. And as John Fugelsang says, and he's quoting Whitman, I think, when telling people the truth, make sure you make them laugh or they will kill you. So, Stephanie Miller, and then, you, like Danielle, you just leave the dial on and that's the way it goes.
Yep, that's right.
And having a background in, I got my undergraduate in music and business, and then I went to law school. That also kind of seeps in as well. Having the music degree and knowing how to do the sound things, and the law kind of goes along with politics. So
it's nobody taught us how to do this. You had to do this all out of nothing, and
ask a lot of questions of other people who do know.
And fortunately, there are nice people. Yes, there are nice people that are out there, and it's good. It's good that you're able to do that, and they're able to have that kind of interest.
One of the main questions that we get, and we're always willing to answer these questions, is we get, and people can email us anytime. They'll say, I have this piece of equipment and I want to do that. How do I do a podcast? And, we'll, how much do you have to spend? Or you can't spend anything. Here's the least expensive way to do it. Or if you want to grow, we love answering those questions, because the more people that do this, the more views we get, the more interesting things, the more perspectives. And everyone in this world, I don't care who they are, if they've reached the age of 18, we can learn something from their life experience and their story. And I want to hear them. So the more people that want to do this, I think is a great thing.
Danielle and Shano, it's fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time and speaking with me today.
It's been a blast. Thanks so much.
Lots of fun. And I won't call you Tom Wheeler anymore. Thank you.
Just wonderful, lovely people. Danielle and Shano can be heard right here live every Sunday, 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific in the morning on netrootsradio.com. We thank them as they have a fantastic, highly paced and highly informative show. Literally, the straw that stirs the drink. I am Fripp. We are kicking ass. let's close it out this way. Who does this Hobby Lobby decision hurt? Let's, reprise it this way. This is from Ian Millhiser at Think Progress. For decades, America's religious liberty law has been guided by a simple principle. One person's religious liberty stops at another person's body. This principle is particularly robust when it is applied to private businesses. So as the Supreme Court explained in United States versus Lee, when followers of a particular sect enter into a commercial activity, as a matter of choice, the limits they accept on their own conduct as a matter of conscience and faith are not to be superimposed on the statutory schemes by which are binding on others in that activity. Hobby Lobby asks the court to abandon that principle and to permit one person's religious objections to diminish the legal rights of somebody else. Now, if the court complies, here are 6 other groups that could bear the burden of that decision in the future. 1, LGBT Americans. Religious conservatives have made no secret about their desire to use religious liberty to immunize themselves from gay rights laws. That desire was the source of the Arizona bill that was ultimately vetoed by Governor Jan Brewer, which sought it make it easier for people with anti-gay views rooted in their religious faith to discriminate against gay people. There's also been no shortage of lawsuits brought by anti-gay photographers, cake bakers, and other business owners seeking a special right to discriminate. Although Hobby Lobby concerns a federal statute and many of these cases challenge state law, it is likely that religious conservatives will try to extend a victory in Hobby Lobby to cover anti-gay discrimination at all levels of government. 2, workers who need health care beside contraception. Now, although Hobby Lobby is about contraceptive coverage, there is at least one precedent for a religious employer refusing to provide any health care benefits to many of its female employees. In the 1980s, a religious school called Fremont Christian claimed that in any marriage, the husband is the head of the household and is required to provide for that household. Thus, although Fremont offered health insurance to its workers, the plan was only available to single people or married men. Married women were generally expected to rely on their husbands or their health benefits, although it is unlikely that the federal courts will rethink this case in its entirety and allow employers to deny coverage to women altogether. A victory for Hobby Lobby potentially places courts in the business of deciding which medical care can be decided on religious grounds. Think about it. It could be up to judges to decide if employers who belong to sects like the Jehovah's Witness faith that have religious objections to blood transfusions can refuse to offer health plans that cover such transfusions. Or whether religious business owners that object to vaccines can refuse to cover immunizations, or whether those Christian scientists who still object to modern medical science altogether can simply refuse to provide coverage at all. Get out. Get up. Register to vote. Remember, the after show is in this time slot the rest of this week and Mondays with Wink and Justice. We're going to be back next Tuesday. Tom Hartman live next. Sam Cedar live with Ring of Fire. Carl in the morning, in the afternoon, followed by the ever-hilarious Juliana Forlano. Then end your day screaming with Mike Malloy live. From David Waldman in the morning to the very end, the end of the day. 12 to 14 hours of live progressive talk and issues right here and more on netrootsradio.com. Voices of America. Turn it on. Leave it on all damn day. I'm Fripp. Thanks for listening. Next week.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, Show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Well, maybe it's like Casey says. The fella ain't got a soul of his own, just a little piece of a big soul. The one big soul that belongs to everybody. Then what, Then it don't matter. I'll be all around in the dark. I'll be everywhere, wherever you can look.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Wherever there's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there.
Somebody's in Des Moines or San Antonio with a young gay person who all of a sudden realizes that she or he is gay, knows that if the parents find out, they'll be tossed out of the house. The classmates would taunt the child.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of North, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slaves will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood.
The child had several options. Staying in a closet, suicide, and then one day that child might open up a paper and it says homosexual elected San Francisco, and there are two new options. Option is to go to California. Stay in San Antonio and fight.
My poor little children one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream.
And you've got to let gay people so that that young child and the thousands upon thousands like that child know that there's hope for a better world. There's hope for a better tomorrow. Without hope, not only gays, but those blacks, the Asians, disabled, seniors, the essence, without hope, the essence give up. I know that you cannot live on hope alone, but without it, life is not worth living. And you gotta give them hope.
I'll be in the way guys yell when they're mad. I'll be in the way kids laugh when they're hungry and they know supper's ready. And when the people are eating the stuff they raise and living in the houses they build, I'll be there too.
What word describes Amnesty International?
What word describes Amnesty International?
What word
describes Amnesty?
Amnesty
International.
What word describes Amnesty International? Freedom.
Hope. Decency.
Conscience. Fulfillment.
What word describes Amnesty International?
Inclusion. Safety.
Action.
Respect.
Solidarity.
The victim could be us.
That's right. That's right.
What describes Amnesty International to me? Love, basically.
Friendship.
Rescue. Equality.
I think of Amnesty as a miracle worker.
Amnesty International is about us.
Come to the forest. It's a place not so far away. A place where you don't have to mow the lawn or babysit. A place where you don't have to make time for free time. Where you can cool down in one of nature's swimming pools. Come meet bugs and birds. You may even meet the mysterious creature known as the other you, the silly you, the adventurous you, the curious you. Ask your parents to take you to this not-so-far-away place. Come to the forest, where the other you lives. But first, stop by discovertheforest.org, a public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Hi, Tom Hartman here on Netroots Radio.